Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is brought to you by MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 218, Arthur Conan Doyle, Sportsman.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
I'm not exactly sure how we should start this out, Burt, but either way, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, I hope you have your sporting gear with you.
I've got my helmet, I've got my shoulder pads, I've got my knee guards, and my boxing gloves. In other words, it's just another ordinary day here.
Perfect. Well, this is full contact conversation, so you sound like you're ready for anything. Do you have your single stick, though?
I do. In fact, I've got two of them, and I was really troubled about that because, well, you get the idea.
Yeah, well, would that make it a double stick then?
Well, that's what I was alluding to. You know, I was baffled by that.
Well, I've got
But you know what I did?
Go ahead.
Found if I took the umbrella out of my pina colada, I could park the extra stick over there.
Always planning ahead. I like that. And you've got refreshment too, so that's good. Keep hydrated.
Yeah.
Keep hydrated.
I am.
Excellent. Well, I have a quarterstaff. Actually, it's a $1.25 but I'm not telling you that. Welcome, everyone, to this episode. We're going to talk about all things related to sport and Conan Doyle. Should be a wide-ranging conversation, and we will introduce you to our guest in just a moment. Little housekeeping first. If you would like, you can find the show notes for this episode at ihose.co/ihose218, all lowercase. That'll take you directly to the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere website, where you can find links and ways to support the show. And if we could remind you, now is the time to go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps other people find the show. And we do appreciate all the support we've gotten from you from PayPal and Patreon. It helps us keep the lights on around here and keeps the show going. So thank you very much. And we welcome your comments whenever you get the chance, either responding to that entry on the show notes, or you can simply email us at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. We love hearing from you. So stay tuned, because right after the interview, we've got another chance for you to win a great prize. Whoops. Mark Alberstadt, master bootmaker and BSI, has been a Sherlockian since his early teens when he began reading the stories from his father's 2-volume Doubleday edition. When he discovered the wider world of Sherlock Holmes, he was fortunate enough to become a regular correspondent with none other than John Bennett Shaw, who encouraged Mark to start a local club in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which he did, all while still in high school. That club, the Spence Munros, continues to meet and is the Sherlockian achievement of which Mark is most proud. In addition, Mark and his wife Joanne edit Canadian Holmes, the quarterly journal of the bootmakers of Toronto. And Mark was invested into the Baker Street Irregulars in 2014 as Halifax. How appropriate. And how appropriate to have you with us today, Mark.
Thank you. It was that's quite the introduction, and I'm glad you brought in John Bennett Shaw. He was instrumental in me being here today to talk about sports.
Absolutely. Well, we've talked with you before about Canada and Sherlock Holmes from the BSI not manuscript series. That's the international series. So
that's right.
You and the late great Peter Calamai edited that together.
That's right. It was a labor of love, Labour. It came from Canada. Unfortunately, I think all those got edited out by some American editor.
My goodness.
But the book was a lot of fun, and here we are today to talk sports, which that book really didn't touch on very much.
No, it didn't. And you know what? My correction, we spoke with Peter for that episode. That was episode 121. So, I thought we had you on the show. I guess we haven't yet. Is that the case?
No. No, I think you and I did a little spot interview after I got invested.
Yes.
The next morning, in the huckster's room. And I think that has been my experience, on air with you.
Okay.
But I've been with you through so many episodes.
That's great. Well, why don't we then back the truck up and ask you to share with everyone how you first came in touch with Sherlock Holmes?
Well, with Sherlock, as you mentioned, it was through my dad's 2-volume Doubleday. My parents have always been great readers, and the house was always full of books, magazines, newspapers, at least one daily newspaper, and news magazines and everything. And early on, I remember seeing those 2 black volumes of Doubleday and reading the story. And it was, the paper was super thin back then, and just enjoying them. And reading them as a young teen, and then somehow I stumbled into a used bookstore and found DeWall's Universal, and found all the mentions of the clubs around the world, and for some reason I started writing to them, and because the list was alphabetical, one of the first ones I wrote to was the Brothers 3 Moriarty, and just by chance it happened to be John Bennett Shaw. And he wrote back, of course, as he would. Not everybody did write back. And he and I had a correspondence monthly for years and years. And he knew I was involved in sports. I was a sports writer for a while. And I wrote sports at the university newspaper and professionally as well. And he mentioned Conan Doyle in sports, and he also sent me an article from Sports Illustrated on Sherlock Holmes Sportsman, and he said, here's a topic that you should do. And sure enough, years later, here we are talking about it, very much thanks to John Bennett Shaw.
That is wonderful. It comes full circle, doesn't it?
It really does. It's the Sherlockian world, as you well know, is so friendly and so wide that no matter what your topic is, you can find some niche. And mine is Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes in sports.
Absolutely.
I wonder what what brought that to mind for John, because when I think of great irregulars who might also be called sportsmen, John's
not on the top of the list.
No,
not at the top.
Unless you count viewing sports.
He would have been big.
Yeah, he was big.
Exactly. So he would have been big into viewing sports. I think he just recognized my interest. And certainly wanted to encourage it. He was so encouraging. I was a teenager when I first contacted him, and he was so encouraging. He sent me clippings, but once a month I'd get this manila envelope just full of stuff. He'd had doubles and triplicates and stuff, and he'd just send it off to me, and there'd be newspaper clippings from all over the world. And occasionally, there'd be, a bit of sports related stuff. Ben Wood and I, from Pleasant Places of Florida, he and I used to exchange headlines clipped out of the newspaper from Holmes the boxer, and it would be Holmes wins another championship, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, it was Holmes the boxer. But he and I love sending these little clippings from the newspaper of just headlines with Holmes in it, winning another championship or having a great bout or whatever have you. And so the two of us enjoyed the riff on Sherlock Holmes and sports as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, for our listeners, if you have not tuned into our other program, which is Trifles, back in season 3 in 2019, we did a whole series of Sherlock Holmes and sports. So there are 12 episodes, one each month, that we did regarding Sherlock Holmes and sports. Everything from, boxing to billiards to single stick, of course. What else did we have? We had shooting and hunting. And, of course, we wrapped it up with the final episode 156, talking about Sherlock Holmes Sportsman, that Sports Illustrated article by William S. Baring Gould. We will have a link to that episode specifically, as well as the full playlist for Trifles in the show notes there if you'd like to check it out.
It was a great series. You guys hit it out of the park with that one.
I see what you did there.
Oh, there you go.
Wow, you are clearly a guest we should have had on earlier, Mark.
Maybe you knew better.
Well, I think what we'd like to do here with you, since you are a purveyor of all things related to sport and Conan Doyle, we want to cover the breadth of his interest and lead up to this article that you've written for Canadian Holmes. Very handy that you happen to be the editor too, but that is about the Summer Olympics and Conan Doyle. We want to eventually get to that, but let's start back with Conan Doyle's own experience with sports and athletics. Where does that begin in his life?
It begins pretty much from him being a little kid. One of the first photos we have of Conan Doyle, he's 14 years old. He's at Stonyhurst, and he's posed, and he's with a cricket bat. He's in his cricket whites, and he's got a cricket bat. He's 14 years old, and that's one of the first pictures we have of him. Now we have, hundreds and hundreds of other photos of Conan Doyle through his life, but one of the first pictures we have is with a cricket bat, and I think that kind of sets him up as a sportsman for his entire life. When he went to Stonyhurst, they had this weird type of cricket called Stonyhurst cricket. That was a bizarre version of it, and he played that. And then while he was there, they also brought in what they called London cricket, which was more standard cricket. But he was a sportsman from his early days to his last day. He was, and cricket was one of his main sports. He was an internationally level cricket player. He played hundreds and hundreds of matches, but several first-class matches. And of course, he played on Barry's team of all the Alaka Berries or something like that. It was a team made up of various literary people, and he was no doubt the star player on that team.
That's fantastic. So in his time, that would have been the 1850s, 1860s, in his youth. Well, actually 1860s. He was born in 59, if I recall. Was it common for cricket to be the introductory sport for most young boys at the time, or was there another way that was more universal?
No, for someone of his class, we'll put it that way, cricket would have been the sport. He later played what we would call soccer, but he played under a pseudonym, A.C. Smith, because it was not the done deal for a gentleman or a doctor at that. No one would visit a doctor who would play soccer. God, you could play rugby, or you could play cricket, but soccer was not the done deal. And so at his level of society, cricket was the thing. It was cricket.
Well, so what an amazing culmination of his athletic prowess and his dreams, probably as a young sportsman, to eventually come up against, was it W.G. Grace?
That's right. Who was known as the Doctor. He was probably the most famous cricketer of the age, and still is one of the most famous cricketers. And sure enough, he came. Conan Doyle was at bat against Grace. Conan Doyle was in his prime. Grace was not, but Grace still outbowled him. He was a far better player than Conan Doyle ever was, of course. And he, it would be someone along our line. Seeing Babe Ruth or being against Babe Ruth, or at the time, of course,
I could take on Babe Ruth these days easily.
Today, sure. I'd stand a chance. Or being in nets with Wayne Gretzky coming down center ice with you, and Gretzky would still deke us out.
Yeah,
Grace was. It was a huge accomplishment for Conan Doyle to play against him. Also, one of the big things in cricket is to get a century or 100 runs. A lot of players will do an entire career without that level. And he did. He got his century and he kept the bat. And the bat was mud encrusted, and it was in his house. I interviewed Dame Jean Conan Doyle quite a while ago, of course, and she remembered the bat, and she remembered the super long ski poles or skis in the house, and playing cricket with her father and being lifted up to shoot billiards. And she had a lot of really, really fond memories of her father and sports, and she wanted him mainly to be remembered as an all-rounder, not as just a cricket player, not just the soccer player, as an all-round athlete. And he was. He anything sports related, he would put his hand to. Boxing, cricket, whatever.
The lovely thing about that W.G. Grace match is that, and this is so characteristic, Mark, of Conan Doyle, that he wrote a poem about it. And, I don't remember all of it, but it's something like, once in the heyday of cricket, one day I shall ever recall, I captured that glorious wicket, the greatest, the grandest of all. And then he goes on, for many, many verses. And, I think so that refers to the fact that, Grace was out, I think, after something like 100 runs or something like that. But that was a huge accomplishment. And then he published the poem somewhere.
Nothing Doyle didn't wind up at some level in one of his writings, and that was certainly one of them. Yeah, I guess I certainly don't know his poetry well. I do know that poem, and I try not to read too much of his poetry for various reasons. But that is certainly one of his more popular ones because it brings in W.G. Grace, and Grace is so famous.
It's called A Reminiscence of Cricket, and it was first published in the Poems of Arthur Conan Doyle in 1922, published by John Murray.
There you go. 1922, so it was very late in his life that it was actually published.
Yeah.
So a true reminiscence.
And we have a link to that poem on the Arthur Conan Doyle Encyclopedia for folks who wish to know it.
A great website. It's full of sports.
It is. So talk to us a little bit about some of Conan Doyle's other sporting interests. He started with cricket. He was certainly passionate about it his whole life. You mentioned skis. You mentioned billiards just then. Where else did his interests take him? And what was he most passionate about?
I'd say early on in his adulthood, and certainly his married life, he joined the cycling craze that hit England, Great Britain, and the world. He jumped in with both feet. Thankfully, they were on pedals, and off he went. There was one very famous picture of him and his wife, and they're on a tricycle, and they're outside their home, and he writes to his mother, basically, I think a couple days after he bought the tricycle, and he talks to her about doing 20 and 30 mile trips on their tricycle, and to do that, you had to be pretty fit. These were early times, and up and down little English country lanes on a tricycle would be quite the thing to see. Big Conan Doyle on the tricycle. He also, of course, had many bicycles over the years, and he even got involved in the auto wheel later in life, which was a contraption that fit on your standard two-wheel bicycle and turned it into basically some kind of little motorized bicycle thing. And it was one of his investments that he lost a lot of money on, as it seems was his want. And certainly bicycling was a primary focus of him. He put it in a lot of his stories. Certainly the Solitary Cyclist is the obvious one, but there's lots of other bicycling allusions in all the Sherlock Holmes stories and some of his other stories too. One of his very early short stories, it was kind of a love triangle story, and the two men involved were trying to win the hand of a woman, and they were going to bet on a horse race. And one of the horses in this story was named Bicycle. So it would be great to find out if he had just recently bought a bicycle. Maybe he bought a bicycle the same day he named the horse. But he named a horse in one of his short stories, Bicycle.
What's really interesting, Mark, is there is a rumor that Conan Doyle named his bicycle Silver Blaze.
I would believe that. From you, I would believe that. Nobody else but you, I'd believe that.
Well, it's certainly more interesting than naming your bicycle horse. That's for sure. So I want to get back to this image of Conan Doyle on a tricycle. His wife was essentially the hood ornament. She was up front, being carried. This was not a tandem job. He was doing all of the work on this contraption.
He was behind, and she was kind of perched in front. She had a little tiny wheel up front that I guess she could maybe hit the brakes or do a little steering with. But if you look at the bicycle, the work is really coming from who's ever in back.
Yeah.
And he was in back. They're both dressed to the nines. They are showing. It was a Strand article featuring their latest literary line, Conan Doyle, and it really shows that the Doyles were the height of fashion, both bicycling and physical fashion. They were there. They've made it. He's successful. He's got a bicycle. He's in the craze, and it's a great picture. And the story itself by Harry Howe talks about him bicycling and how much he enjoyed it. So no doubt, cycling was a big factor in his life. He enjoyed it. His sons took up auto racing. I think Conan Doyle liked anything with speed, and his sons certainly spent a lot of their father's money on fast cars and early motor car racing in England.
Yeah. Well, so the time that Conan Doyle was highlighted with his wife on the bicycle, this would have been his first wife, Louisa or Tui. She had some health issues, didn't she?
Oh, quite a bit, and maybe it was for the best that she was perched in front, and not. Although I'm not sure if too many of us could pedal around Conan Doyle.
So that's true. Formidable, no doubt. So, do you think this was a way to kind of get her a little more active or get her out in the fresh air? I mean, she suffered from tuberculosis, so this was part of the reason they moved down to Portsmouth. What's the reasoning there with someone who is struggling with health, being active or pseudo-active alongside someone like Conan Doyle?
Well, I think part of it is health. Part of it's getting out, getting a boat, and part of it is the bicycling craze. Everyone was doing it. He wanted the two of them to be involved in the craze. It was sweeping the world, and they wanted to be part of it. So, he was very successful by this time, and it was one of the trappings of success was to follow the fads, including the sporting fads at the time. So I think she went along with them. Now, she wasn't a cricketer. He was playing cricket almost every weekend. Their honeymoon was part of a cricket tour to Ireland. So, which sounds very romantic with the rest of the cricket team. I don't know what she thought of it, but that was their honeymoon. And I think the image of her on the bicycle just also it goes to him being the larger than life presence. He loved sports. She was going to be involved.
Got it.
And she was.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a quick break here. We're talking with Mark Alberstadt about Conan Doyle and sports. When we come back, we'll cover some more of those sports as well as Mark's landmark article about Conan Doyle and the 1912 Summer Olympics. Stay with us.
Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle have been topics of conversation in the world of literature ever since 1895. Wouldn't it be great to look through all those discussions, have all those articles, reviews, and commentary in one place on your bookshelf? Now you can, because the Wessex Press has published Sherlock Holmes, Conan Doyle, and the Bookman. All the pastiches, parodies, letters, all the columns and commentaries about Sherlock Holmes from 1895 to 1933, from the finest literary magazine of the 20th century, The Bookman, in one place, bringing back dozens of long-lost commentaries about the chronicles of Sherlock Holmes. Don't wait until this handsome volume is out of print. Get your copy of Sherlock Holmes, Conan Doyle, and The Bookman right now at wessexpress.com. You know, one of the lovely things about Conan Doyle is that he did more than share his enthusiasms. He had a certain, maybe you disagree with this sort of slightly, Mark, but the way I see it is that he had sort of a view of what was right and proper and best about the character of the British public, about the character. Now, in these days, of course, the character of the British man, and he never shied away from advocating. And so, he would write an essay about the health effects of bicycling, and then he would discover ski running as an example when he was in Norway or Switzerland, and then became the early advocate for skiing as a hobby. But this sort of seems to fit to me into this larger category of Conan Doyle, the advocate and enthusiasm for national character, but also just for things that he thought, epitomized what he would have called proper manhood.
Very much so, very much so. For him, it was always amateur sport. He wasn't too keen on the professionals in the sport, but for amateur sport, it showed who you were, what you were made of, and he wanted Britain, of course, made of the best stuff, and for him, the best stuff were athletes. And athletes would not have just participated in one sport. They would have done everything. Golf, cricket, whatever. As long as they were active and they were good at it and enthusiastic, he was behind them. He would say it would make Britain better. It would make them better. And he was also an early advocate of bodybuilding. He was a great friend of a very famous bodybuilder of the time, and he wrote an introduction to this guy's book. And he helped judge a bodybuilding contest. In fact, it was for him. Sport was something to get out, do, and get better at, and be a better person doing.
It's interesting because, your earlier remark, you said that first photo that we see of Conan Doyle when he's 14, he has a cricket bat. And of course, he was very shaped by his early school experience. And if you are in a school with other boys, the way to popularity, the way to survive, is to really excel at sport. And of course, Conan Doyle had an advantage because he was larger than his peers. I mean, my memory is that he was taller than the average boy or man of his age. And he was also, as you point out, interested in athletics, interested in bodybuilding. He was much more fit.
Very much so. And some of the early team pictures of him, it's no problem picking him out of the crowd. He's so much bigger and so much taller. And even later in life when he was touring America and he went to see several baseball games and he wrote a lot about baseball, part of it was he would write about their professionalism. And he didn't care for that. You could tell. He wanted England to take up baseball, and he thought it would be great on the summer, through the summer and whatnot. But he didn't want the professionals. He wanted everybody to just enjoy it for the sport that it was. And at one point, he talks about some of the professionals in America, and he says they're pretty hard-looking guys. And sure enough, they would have been, but they were for the most part, they were one-sport athletes. Yeah. And he wanted everybody to enjoy everything. And that was one issue he had with baseball, but he thought baseball would be a great sport for England. It takes a couple hours to play an entire game. You're not there for 3-4 days with a cricket match or something. While someone's getting their century, you're in the pavilion just watching and having a smoke. Everybody's active in baseball. You're either in the infield, outfield, whatever, if you're at bat. Yeah. You're pitching, whatever have you. For him, baseball was a great sport, and he advocated for that too. He advocated for almost any sport if you could be active in it. Yeah. And he would love it, and he'd give it a try. There was nothing he wouldn't put his hand at.
Right. And the nice thing, well, of course, he also played golf. Now that I think about it, he played golf in Vermont with Rudyard Kipling. But baseball, right. The lovely thing is, particularly when you're with a stadium full of Americans, there's cheering, and you're really involved. But, that gets to sort of this whole idea of the joy of being popularly focused on athletic accomplishment. And that sort of gets us to the Olympics, because in 1908, so now Conan Doyle is in his 50s, and in 1908, Britain had a very good showing at the Olympics. But 4 years later, that wasn't something that they maintained, and that affected him profoundly, didn't it?
It really did. The Olympics they fell down on were Stockholm, 1912, and they were the cream of the crop in the previous Olympics. They were the best, and Stockholm comes along, and before the Olympics are even over, everybody in England is either pulling their hair out. They don't know what to do. What has happened? It's a national tragedy. Things are falling from the sky, may as well. It was that bad. And they placed third, well below the upstart American team. And I think that hurt him as well. But it was, for him, as we've said, sports is far more than the sport. It is who you are. And for Britain not to win an Olympics or not do well at an Olympics, to see all these other countries on the podium and their teams behind 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th place, that really, really hurt him. And he started writing letters to the editor saying, this cannot happen in 4 years' time. And he advocated for it. As you say, he advocated for a lot of sports and whatnot. But the Olympics and a really good British Olympic team was in his sights, and he didn't want to let it go. He grabbed that bone, and he was going to work it. He was going to work it.
Well, and to make matters even worse, after Conan Doyle started his letter writing campaign, where he was really kind of cajoling the country into getting into shape and kind of shaking this off and getting active again. To make matters worse, as you quote in your article in Canadian Holmes, at the end of July 1912, there was a letter that appeared in the Evening Standard by a German resident of London, saying that Conan Doyle, the greatest novelist, recognizes that in making this suggestion, a British Empire team is tacitly admitting that you no longer in your country of England have men fit to compete with those of other nations in a field which you once rightly considered to be your own. Your people are getting over-civilized and you are becoming what you call soft. That had to be the ultimate insult to Conan Doyle.
Now, this is where we put in the apology to our German listeners, but also,
if they're still listeling.
Scott, your monocle slipped there. Do you want to just take a minute?
We have our ways. We have our ways, but
yeah,
it's true. It's a great letter, and when I found it, I couldn't not put it.
It is great, and I'll go even one further. The conclusion there, which I didn't read before, really is reminiscent of Mycroft Holmes. He says, "No, you sit down in your easy chairs, which you make fat and heavy, and you write letters to the editor."
Which Conan Doyle loved to do, and was rather fat and heavy in his easy chair.
He was,
that interestingly enough, I never thought about that, but that particular sentence now, you sit down in your easy chair and you write letters to the editor. How interesting the link back to von Bork and that narration in his last bow, that conversation in his last bow, where he describes a somnambulant and how much Martha, the housekeeper, is like the average British person. How interesting. I wonder if there's a link between that letter and that characterization.
Well, and let's also recall that von Bork, and I guess it was the discussion with von Herling, he was saying you beat them at their own sports. You play polo against them,
right.
And saying how he is shaming the English by beating them at their own games.
And Conan Doyle would have, although he wrote it, he obviously would have been smarting from it. Anyone beating England at English sports, oh, what a tragedy! What a tragedy! It's a good thing they didn't invent ice hockey here. Canada wouldn't have been kicked out of the empire. So.
Well, hey, let's not go all Toronto Maple Leafs on us now, right?
No one would. No one would. I am in Halifax. And it would be interesting to know if that German writer to the Times, I believe, ever read all of the Sherlock Holmes stories and saw himself as von Bork. Maybe there was something there. Maybe. I'll have to track down that letter writer and find out for a future podcast. His work with the Olympics was tireless. He wrote all kinds of letters extolling the virtues of the Olympics, the virtues of amateur sport, and the need for Britain to put together a good, rational program to create a great team for the next Olympics. Now, the next Olympics didn't happen because of World War I, the breakout of World War I, but he helped create a subcommittee of the British Olympics Committee, and they were tasked to raise funds, but also raise the awareness of the importance of the Olympics around Britain. Eventually, they finally did go to the public seeking a fund to support athletes. Originally, Conan Doyle thought £10,000 would be enough. The committee eventually asked for £100,000, which he was gobsmacked. He claims he was out of the country at the time. I didn't know anything about it. But whatever happened, the committee asked for £100,000. This is back in 1912, 1913. That you could have bought probably Oxford for less than that. So it was a huge amount. It certainly wasn't a trifling sum of money. I thought I'd just throw that in. And
appreciate that.
And by the time they eventually dissolved this committee that Lord Northcliffe had asked Conan Doyle to be part of, they had raised just a pittance. I think it was 10, 11,000 pounds, a small fraction of what they were really going for. And that money was to find athletes all across England. They were going beat the hedgerows. They were going to go to the farms. They were going to find athletes who weren't necessarily on sporting teams, find them and say, hey, you're a great discus player. You could throw the javelin or hurdles or whatever have you. Although you may have worked all your life on a farm. They were going to scour the country, find the best athletes, and they were also going to find professional coaches, and they would be specialized in certain sports, and they would train these people. And there were also, he also wanted a series of competitions leading up to the Olympics that would kind of winnow down the best of the best. And at the time, the best of the best stayed home. They didn't go to the Olympics. They went to Wimbledon. They played cricket. The Olympics weren't that important to them. Conan Doyle saw otherwise because he saw the national pride of other teams, and he wanted the same kind of pride for England, and it just wasn't happening.
And the great irony is, just a year or two later, Great Britain would enter the Great War, where, athletic prowess, or at least physical prowess, was required to sustain life in, certainly in the trenches, but certainly army life beyond that as well. So this search for athletes was almost concurrent with the need for physically fit men who could fight on behalf of the empire.
That's right. And, the war certainly garnered a lot of nationalism, and Conan Doyle was such a strong nationalist. We all know he wrote pamphlets and whatnot, but he saw sports as a way to that end. If you were a great athlete, you could be a great soldier. And coming back from the Boer War, he noticed a lot of the British soldiers, when they were fighting the Boers, would use a lot of ammunition to hit one Boer. The Boers, who were on their horses and were all farmers, could take a couple pot shots and hit a couple British people, British soldiers. And he came back along with Rudyard Kipling and started a series of shooting competitions to train just average people like you and I on how to use rifles and how to shoot. And he set up a Conan Doyle award for shooting. And I'm going to be writing on this this summer. And that award is still given out today. It's been going on since, I believe, 1906 was the first time. And if you're in a British shooting club and you're very good and you're competing nationally, you'll often compete for the Conan Doyle Award. And that goes right back to the Boer War and Conan Doyle's thoughts on how everybody should know how to shoot.
What a missed opportunity to call it the Colonel Moran Award.
Oh, that would have been so good. And it was an early version of the NRA, the British National Rifle Association. And so Conan Doyle and the NRA, you never know.
Who knows? Well, it's interesting because you bring up the point there, Mark, of Conan Doyle, kind of advocating for athleticism, advocating for this kind of national pride, and yet in his effort to help the British Olympic Committee raise funds, which again he thought they overshot with their estimate, and in 1914 they admitted they only raised just under 11,000 pounds, and years later Conan Doyle wrote it up in, I think it was in Memories and Adventures. He must have mentioned it. how he was sorely disappointed in the effort, and not just the outpouring or lack of outpouring of support, but the lack of recognition that he got from that effort. You want to read that quote and talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, it started when he got a telegram from Lord Northcliffe, the publisher of pretty much everything in England at the time. He was a very famous person at the time. Lord Northcliffe telegrammed Conan Doyle, and Conan Doyle said, quote, "In for about as much trouble as any communications which he ever received," and it left him on his guard against Northcliffe telegrams after that. Northcliffe urged him to join the British Olympic Committee, and he said Conan Doyle had the ability to rally the country around him. But by the end of it, Conan Doyle said it was a year of his life, and it was a wasted time. Which is sad for him to say. He was so active and so much. He wrote so many letters. He just didn't see it come together. And that initial telegram from Lord Northcliffe would forever put him on his guard. Unfortunately, Lord Northcliffe donated a lot of money to the committee and then just disappeared, leaving Conan Doyle kind of sitting there, and there was a committee. Conan Doyle was part of it, but the overall Olympic committee and Olympic work that he did kind of left him disappointed and sad, which is unfortunate. Not all countries are going to be on the top of the podium. We know that. Conan Doyle wouldn't accept it.
Well, I guess we're thankful for a man who was not satisfied with the status quo and who was always striving for higher. I think, as anyone with high standards like that, it's always a difficult wake-up call when the rest of society does not kind of rise to the level of your expectations. And certainly Conan Doyle, whether it was his first wife who didn't necessarily share his impressive love of sport at the same level he did, or whether it was the general public. Conan Doyle may have been frustrated in those regards and simply continued on his own. I mean, he was fairly active in many things right through the end of his life.
Very much. He, of course, I mentioned cricket. He didn't continue cricket through his older age, but it is a very active sport. He, I forget where it was said, but he got a cricket ball on the side of his knee at one time, and I don't think he ever fully recovered from that to play cricket, but he certainly was active in everything else, including billiards. You mentioned billiards. He got to the quarterfinal of the British Amateur Championships, and that alone, that's pretty good to get that far. Now, of course, he was wealthy. He had time on his hands. He had a billiards room in his house. He could practice whenever he wanted. I don't know how much he slept, but if he was, up at 2 a.m. one day, why not shoot a few balls in the billiards room? But he was very, very good at it too. A lot of us can play sports, but few of us would play as many sports and at the level that he did. And I think we have to remember that Conan Doyle, we like to think of him as that gentleman with the big mustache and at his desk writing all these stories and Sherlock Holmes this and the spiritualism that. But we have to remember he was a competitor through and through. He was a competitor in his sports. He was a competitor in his amateurism. And he was a competitor when it came to his writing. We think of him as the writer for The Strand, but he wrote for so many other journals. And when he was doing that, he was telling other writers, I'm everywhere. I am everywhere. You're a publisher. Your publisher's good, but they'll take anything from me. So he was competitive with everything he did. And that pretty much until his end, because he passed that competitivism along to his sons and Jean too. She was a competitor. As I said, there was one story she told us. They were playing cricket in their backyard, and Conan Doyle was at bat, hits the ball, and smashes little Jean in the face with the cricket ball. And so she said she wasn't really hurt, but she said forever after they played with a soft, squishy ball. So who knows if he would have done that if he had hit Adrian or one of his sons in the face with the ball. But he certainly changed things when he hit little Jean in the face. And the boys loved their fast cars, and he would go for a spin with them. He got several speeding tickets when he was at the wheel. And Bert, you mentioned that he never did anything that didn't wind up in one of his writings. Well, at one time he flipped his car coming into the estate. He hit one of the posts leading into the estate, and he was trapped under the car. Thankfully, he was doing bodybuilding, or he says, thankfully at the time he was bodybuilding, and he was able to hold the car up against his spine, and it didn't cripple him, obviously. People rushed over and were able to right the car. That turned into a story later in life where the two people in the car didn't quite make it, and they're looking at the scene and they're both ghosts looking at or spirits, I guess, looking at the scene of the accident. So whatever it was Conan Doyle would write about, he didn't write much about billiards. But I'm sure if we delve into it, there's somewhere in there's billiards, no doubt. And there's just, it's a deep subject of Conan Doyle and sports. He just loved his sports. And we could talk forever.
That's really fascinating, Mark. And, it's probably buried somewhere in the literature that he named his billiards table Desk.
No, he did spend a lot of time there. I'll just be spending some time at my desk.
Well, Mark, thank you for joining us at the desk here of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. We will have lots of links in the show notes, including how to subscribe to Canadian Holmes, where you can read Mark's fascinating article on Arthur Conan Doyle and the 1912 Summer Olympics. Mark, thank you for joining us here.
Thanks for the invite. I'll talk on this subject anytime you guys call.
We love Sherlock Holmes, and it's wonderful to take some time and talk to someone like Mark, who is so enthusiastic and informed and knowledgeable about Conan Doyle, and lay out these events in Conan Doyle's life, these aspects of his character, his enthusiasm, and then look at how that translates into Holmes. I think it's really wonderful. And Conan Doyle, one of these people, the more you find out about him, it's one of the reasons why there's so many biographies existing of Conan Doyle, that the more you find out about him, the more interesting he becomes.
Yeah, I mean, he was his own walking Olympic Games when you think about it. And, interesting because Mark did share the full article with us. There was a quote in there where Conan Doyle thought that boxing and wrestling should not be included in the Olympic Games. And look, I took a course as an undergraduate, as a classics major, called Sport in the Ancient World. And we studied the ancient Olympics. And guess what? Wrestling was the original Olympic sport. So for Conan Doyle to say that that wrestling does not belong in the modern Olympics is anathema to anyone who knows and understands Olympic history.
Yes, that's true. But his rationale for that was that unlike other sports, boxing and wrestling were more prone to moments of anger, moments of heat, moments of physical injury. And it's another case of him being focused on athletic excellence that can be expressed in a way that doesn't result in anger or potential injury to someone else. So I thought that the rationale was nice.
Well, I mean, that's easy for a guy to say who hit his daughter in the face with a cricket ball. He probably saw Gene's reaction and corrected himself. Well, fascinating stuff. And, interesting, too, as we look at the similarities and differences in the Sherlock Holmes stories, that I believe it was in The Yellow Face where Watson said Sherlock Holmes rarely took exercise for exercise's own sake. Holmes was certainly fit. He was capable of large bursts of energy, but he was not someone who simply exercised just to keep it up. And, that in some way must have been anathema to Conan Doyle, but at the same time was very consistent with Sherlock Holmes's personality. That, can you imagine him spending long, mindless hours at a gymnasium just working on his body?
Well, there's a lot going on there. You could say to yourself that, Watson's knowledge and observation of Holmes was sketchy and incomplete as his observations of the world as we see his work with Sherlock Holmes become sketchy and incomplete at times. Because Holmes, after all, while he may never have exercised vigorously, or at least not in Watson's presence, is fit enough to bend this poker, in the famous speckled band incident. And then there are plenty of times when, he has to defend himself and he's in scrapes and scuffles and things like that. And look at the famous, one of the all-time great accomplishments in field running is, of course, Holmes' performance in The Final Problem, or actually as recorded in The Empty House, when he tells us that from his perch there on the ledge of Reichenbach, he eventually took to his feet and 2 weeks later found himself in Florence. What a run!
That is amazing. And he covered, didn't he say he covered some 10 miles before sunset that very evening? That's like a half marathon, nearly. So, great point about Holmes's just level of fitness. And, just take the incident in the opening of Black Peter, where he comes back from Allardyce's butcher shop, where he spent a couple of hours trying to spear a pig hanging on a rope, with a harpoon. That is no slouch either.
Yep. No, of course, what Watson and the editors haven't told us is that there wasn't any rope, and the pig was actually quite frisky, and that's one of the reasons why it took Holmes such a long time, because it just kept dodging out of the way until Holmes got exhausted. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, because I think about, and we may have talked about this on an episode of Trifles, but I think about the physics of the pig hanging there, like a punching bag in boxing training, and it would be swinging, and it's a lot different than if a pig were stationary, like Black Peter would have been, standing and then shoved up against the wall. Well, of course, it would have been difficult or impossible to transfix a pig hanging by the rope. The physics simply don't work.
Yeah. Well, also, one of the things that we should have been told but have never been told is that after each successful connection between Holmes' harpoon and that poor body of the pig, a bell would ring and Holmes would get a small stuffed prize.
Or a bacon cheese butty. Well, you may recall us speaking to playwright David McGregor here on episode 140. The good news is our friends at MX Publishing now have some of David McGregor's work in stock. 3 new books by David McGregor, including Sherlock in Love, the Holmes-Adler Mysteries. These are a triptych of plays that first appeared at the Purple Rose Theater in Chelsea, Michigan. The Adventure of the Elusive Ear, The Adventure of the Fallen Soufflé, and The Adventure of the Ghost Machine. All 3 are creative and bring Holmes into contact with other people whom you may have heard of, including Vincent van Gogh, Auguste Escoffier, and Tesla and Edison. Adding to the other group of books is David's 2-volume series, Sherlock Holmes, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. In these books, David takes us on a journey through the late 1800s, early 1900s, through the end of the 20th century and into the 21st, as Sherlock Holmes has been played by so many different actors and was brought to life by so many different forces. David takes us through these various times and introduces us to names that you may be familiar with and names that may be new to you. All three of these books are available at mxpublishing.com today. Well, you know that song? That means it's time for everyone's favorite quiz show. That's right, it's Canonical Couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry, and you have to guess the Sherlock Holmes story we are referring to. Now, if you were here with us on episode 217, you'll recall that we gave you this clue. Watson rushed to Mary, said, "I'm off to Birmingham." And downstairs in a cab, he met a Cockney city man. Bert, do you know which story we are talking about here?
Yes, of course I do. This is the great case of Mrs. Neville St. Clair, who turns to Sherlock Holmes when her laundry service delivers her ruined undergarments. This is the case Watson called The Van with the Twisted Slip.
No. There's something twisted about this. That is for sure. That is for sure. No, and you're not even close. I thought you were getting somewhere with the man with the twisted lip, but no, we were looking for the stockbroker's clerk.
Oh, of course.
Or the stockbroker's clerk, if you are pronouncing this in the British dialect, which our friend Eric Decker has picked up on with his entry. He said, it's the story where ACD tried to irritate Americans by using words we pronounce differently over here. The lieutenant and the clerk put basil in their tomato yogurt. Then I realized it was the story The Stockbroker's Clerk. Well, thank you, Eric, for getting in on the spirit of the British pronunciation there. And now we'll get in on the spirit of selecting a winner. So let's get the big prize wheel out here and give it a big spin. Goes around, slowing down, easing and landing on number 82. Number 82. Wow, that's up there high out of 100. Number 82 corresponds to Charlie Blankstein. Charlie. Well, congratulations to you, Charlie. We will be sending out that prize from our iHose vaults, which this time around I believe was a collection of Sherlock Holmes quiz books and puzzles. So stay tuned for that. And now we are ready for this episode's Canonical Couplet. Bert, are you ready?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Here we go. A furtive physiologist who now ignores his secretary will owe his life to Watson in case that's cautionary. If you know the answer to this week's Canonical Couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com. We will attempt to draw you at random if you are correct, and you will win a prize. Good luck. Well, make sure you put Canonical Couplet in the email that you send to us, and we will have this wonderful prize for you out of our vaults. Well, you'll have to stay tuned to see what it is, because it's something that you will absolutely adore. Well, Bert, as much as I adore the time here with you, I think the time has come for us to wish everyone adieu.
I'm so glad we had this time together, just to have a laugh or sing a song. You know, it seems we just get started. When it's time, we've got to say so long.
I'm tugging at my earlobe furtively and furiously right now. Well, until the next time we meet, I remain the always together Scott Monty.
And I am the poet laureate, Bert Wolder.
And together we say, the game's afoot.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.